Most people think the greatest guitarists in history are the ones who can shred the fastest or play the most complicated scales. But Neil Young has never cared about that. To him, music isn't a competition of technique. It's an X-ray of the soul. He once said that nobody gives a damn about perfect scales or flashy tricks. What matters is whether a musician can take everything they feel and channel it straight into the strings. And for Young, that single idea has always separated the good from the legendary. What's fascinating is how consistent he's been about it. Every time he talks about the guitarists he admires most, he returns to the same principle: authenticity over perfection, expression over precision. It explains why he could leave a global hit behind without blinking, follow his instincts into completely different genres, and stand firm in the face of entire industries pushing him the other way. Young has always been led by feeling, and the guitarists who shaped him share that exact spirit. But here's what makes his choices so intriguing. The 5 players he calls the greatest aren't similar at all. They come from different worlds, different techniques, and completely different levels of fame. Some are quiet, some are explosive, some are almost unknown to the mainstream, and one changed the sound of rock forever. Yet to Young, they all belong in the same rare category: artists who don't just play the guitar, but speak through it. And once you understand why these specific musicians made his list, you start to see a pattern that reveals something deeper about Young himself. These aren't random selections or nostalgic favorites. They're the 5 people who represent the purest form of musical honesty, the kind of honesty Young considers sacred. Before we dive into the first name, there's one question that hangs over this entire list. What does it take to impress a man who never cared about technical perfection in the first place? The answer begins with a guitarist who barely raised his volume above a whisper, yet changed everything for the ones who truly listened. J.J. Cale, the quiet mastermind. For most listeners, J.J. Cale barely shows up on the radar. He never chased the spotlight, never fought for magazine covers, and never pushed his way into the center of the musical universe. But to the people who truly understand the instrument, Cale isn't just important, he's foundational. Neil Young once said that you can call Clapton a guitar god if you want, but even Clapton couldn't play like J.J. Cale. And that wasn't an insult to Clapton at all. It was Young's way of highlighting how impossible Cale's style really was. There was a softness, a sensitivity, and a kind of ghost-like precision in his playing that nobody else could imitate without losing something essential. Cale had that rare ability to create intensity without raising his voice. He didn't need a wall of amps or wild theatrics to grab your attention. His power came from subtle choices, the way he nudged a note just slightly behind the beat, the way his tone drifted in like it was floating across the room. Even when he played something technically simple, it carried this warm, hypnotic pull that wrapped around the listener. It's no wonder Young called him one of the 2 greatest electric guitarists to ever pick up the instrument. To Young, Cale didn't just play songs, he created an atmosphere. But that same understated approach came with a cost. Cale wasn't built for the business side of music. Young once mentioned his lack of business acumen, and he wasn't wrong. Cale's debut album, Naturally, is a gentle masterpiece.
You called me to breathe. I keep low.
The kind of record that feels like it was recorded at sunrise, half awake and entirely honest. And yet, despite its brilliance, the album didn't chart. It was destined to be one of those cult classics people discover years later and wonder how they missed it the first time. Ironically, the musicians who understood his genius were the ones already standing at the top. Clapton admired him so much that he turned Cale's songs into hits. Young would go on to play with him and came out of the experience almost shaken, as if he had just seen what true restraint looked like. And throughout those encounters, Cale never changed. He stayed quiet, stayed minimal, stayed rooted in the belief that you don't need to shout if you're saying something real. That's the thread Young cared about most: honesty. Cale's entire approach was a rebellion against showmanship. While the world rewarded louder players with flashier tricks, he carved out a small, peaceful corner where the focus stayed on feel rather than force. And for Young, that made him not just influential but essential. Cale represented a kind of purity in electric guitar playing, a reminder that real expression doesn't need to be exaggerated. But if Cale ruled the world of subtlety, the next guitarist Young praises lived on the opposite end of the spectrum. A man who played so fiercely, it seemed like the instrument was channeling something otherworldly. And according to Young, Nobody ever took the guitar to a more uncharted place. Jimi Hendrix. Expression beyond technique. If J.J. Cale ruled with quiet authority, Jimi Hendrix existed on the opposite end of the universe. Everything about him felt explosive, not just the sound, but the spirit behind it. Yet what fascinated Neil Young wasn't the noise or the theatrics. It was the way Hendrix seemed to merge with his guitar, as if the two of them were caught in the same electrical charge. Young once said that Hendrix was simply the best when it came to pure expression, and that wasn't a comment about skill. It was about connection. Hendrix didn't play the guitar, he communicated through it. Young admired how Hendrix looked almost entranced on stage. His solos didn't feel rehearsed or calculated, they felt summoned. It was the kind of performance that made the listener wonder if Hendrix was discovering the notes in real time, channeling something that went beyond music. For Young, that kind of raw expression is what separates a guitarist who knows how to play from one who can reshape the boundaries of the instrument itself. And that's exactly what Hendrix did. He didn't just expand rock guitar, he detonated it. But what Young respected most might surprise people. He wasn't fixated on Hendrix's technical wizardry, though it was impossible to ignore. He was drawn to the way Hendrix led a trio. Most guitarists dominate a band by sheer force, but Hendrix balanced power with sensitivity. The Jimi Hendrix experience didn't sound like one man showing off. It sounded like three musicians building a storm together. Young always highlighted the chemistry between Hendrix, Noel Redding, and Mitch Mitchell. It was a unit, a unified electric organism. That dynamic shaped how Young approached his own bands. He often insisted that his group's name appear just as prominently as his own, because he believed in that same shared elevation. It wasn't about hierarchy. It was about creating a space where everyone mattered. Hendrix taught him that even the greatest guitarist alive still needed a powerful foundation, a rhythm section that wasn't following but merging. Young once said that no guitarist from the 60s came close to Hendrix in the way he played rock in a trio format. And it wasn't just a compliment. It was an acknowledgement that Hendrix had unlocked a dimension of musical expression that others couldn't touch. A kind of wild, fearless openness that allowed him to take the guitar somewhere entirely new. But while Hendrix mastered the electric realm with volcanic energy, the next guitarist Young praises ruled the acoustic world with equal intensity, without ever raising the volume. And in Young's eyes, what this musician achieved with 6 steel strings was just as groundbreaking as anything Hendrix did with a wall of amps. Bert Jansch, acoustic innovator. In the world of guitar legends, the spotlight almost always lands on the players who plug in, crank up, and tear through the mix. But for Neil Young, one of the greatest to ever touch the instrument didn't need amplification at all. His name was Bert Jansch, a quiet Scottish folk musician whose playing carried the same kind of shock factor Young felt the first time he heard Hendrix. Except instead of distortion or volume, Jansch relied on precision, tone, and pure musical instinct. Young has never been shy about what Jansch meant to him. He once said that as great as Hendrix was on electric guitar, Jansch represented the same level of mastery on acoustic. That comparison alone reveals the level of respect he had for this unassuming folk figure. Jansch didn't just play acoustic guitar, he redefined it. His fingerpicking wasn't polite or decorative. It was sharp, rhythmic, and unapologetically unique. The guitar sounded like it was being played by two people at once, weaving melody and percussion together in a way that felt almost supernatural. That kind of originality leaves a mark, and Young felt it deeply. Over the years, he's admitted that some of Jansch's melodies slipped into his own work without him even realizing it. When he finally recognized it, he didn't hide it. He called it what it was, influence so powerful it seeped into his subconscious. And instead of being embarrassed, he treated it like a badge of honor. Because to Young, borrowing from Jansch wasn't stealing. It was learning from someone who had mastered a language he hadn't fully understood yet. And Young wasn't alone in that awe. Johnny Marr once said that Bert Jansch was one of the first musicians who made the concept of cool truly meaningful. Not the flashy, stylized version of cool, but the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need approval to push boundaries. Jansch's playing carried that spirit. Every note felt deliberate, but never stiff. Every melody felt ancient and new at the same time. It was the kind of artistry that doesn't try to impress you, it simply draws you in. What made Jansch stand out even more was the vulnerability of the acoustic guitar itself. There's no distortion to hide behind, no effects to smooth things out. Every touch, every brush of the string, every shift in pressure becomes part of the sound. That level of exposure turns the instrument into a truth-telling device. And Jansch embraced it. He played with such clarity that even the smallest nuance felt intentional. That's the kind of honesty Young spent his entire career chasing. But while Jansch reshaped the acoustic landscape through individuality, the next guitarist on Young's list influenced him in a completely different way. This wasn't a virtuoso who stood alone or a folk visionary rewriting tradition. This was a player whose strength came from blending in, a musician who elevated everyone around him simply by listening. And in Young's world, that skill was just as rare as genius. Nils Lofgren, the ultimate team player. When people talk about great guitarists, they usually picture someone standing at the front of the stage, commanding the room with a solo that forces every spotlight to turn their way. But Neil Young's respect for Nils Lofgren comes from the exact opposite quality. Lofgren isn't the type to steal a moment. He's the kind who makes every moment around him better. Young once said that Lofgren was part of the band, and he meant it as the highest praise possible. Because to Young, guitar brilliance isn't just about playing, it's about listening. Lofgren has a gift that's easy to miss if you're only watching from the surface. His technique is razor sharp, his tone is expressive, and he can deliver a blistering rock solo when the moment demands it. But what Young admired most wasn't the flash, it was the sensitivity. Lofgren plays like someone who hears the whole room at once. He adjusts to the drummer's energy, locks into the bass line, and follows Young's lead without ever losing his own voice. It's almost jazz-like in its awareness. A constant balancing act between boldness and restraint. That kind of intuition is rare, and it's one of the reasons Young's music changed when Lofgren was around. Their dynamic wasn't a typical lead guitarist with a backing band scenario. Lofgren's presence challenged Young, pushed him, lifted him. When someone has that much awareness in their playing, it forces everyone else to rise to the moment. Young has even said that Lofgren's ability to fit in without disappearing brought out some of the best performances of his life. It's a quality that didn't go unnoticed by others, either. Bruce Springsteen once described Lofgren as a rare blend of musical and emotional intelligence, the kind of musician who can walk into any environment and instantly understand what the song needs. That's a superpower in any band, but in Young's world, where honesty and instinct drive everything, it becomes invaluable. Lofgren's style isn't about showing dominance. It's about elevating the collective sound until everyone shines. What makes Lofgren even more impressive is that he could have been a traditional guitar hero if he wanted to. He had the skill, the flair, and the stage presence. But he chose to be the glue instead, the musician who holds the chaos together and makes it feel effortless. It's the kind of role that rarely earns headlines but leaves a lasting impact on everyone who shares the stage with him. And that's exactly why Young valued him so much. Lofgren wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't competing, and he wasn't chasing recognition. He was simply focused on the music, responding to every shift like a reflex. In a world full of guitarists trying to cut through the noise, Lofgren mastered the art of blending in just enough to make the entire song stronger. But the next guitarist on Young's list was a very different figure, someone whose presence couldn't blend into anything. A musician whose sound was so massive, so unmistakable, that Young felt his entire artistic direction shift after hearing him. And the way this guitarist reshaped Young's approach still echoes decades later. Jimmy Page, the imperfect genius. And then there's the name no one can ignore, the one guitarist Neil Young has praised more openly, more consistently, and more passionately than almost anyone else. Jimmy Page. But Young's admiration isn't rooted in the myth, the fireworks, or even the legacy of Led Zeppelin. What he sees in Page is something far more elusive, the kind of musical truth that can't be taught, polished, or replicated. Page has never been a mistake-free guitarist.
It isn't hard to feel me glowing.
He has never tried to be. His live recordings are full of missed notes, rough edges, and moments where it sounds like everything might fall apart. But that's exactly what made him transcendent to players like Young. because Page played with risk. He walked out on stage and pushed himself into places where the outcome wasn't guaranteed. And when it worked, which it often did, it felt like witnessing lightning hit a moving target. Young has always been suspicious of perfection. He believes the life gets drained out of music the moment an artist cares more about being flawless than being alive. And Page embodies that idea better than almost anyone. His guitar tone was raw, unpredictable, and sometimes even chaotic, but it had a pulse. It had danger. It had the kind of emotional charge that only comes from someone playing right on the edge of control. What fascinated Young most wasn't the riffs or the solos, although he respected those too, but the way Page constructed entire sonic landscapes. The layering, the open tunings, the orchestral approach to rock guitar. Page wasn't just playing an instrument. He was building worlds. Worlds that felt ancient, mystical, and somehow familiar all at once. To Young, that ability to create atmosphere was proof that Page wasn't merely a guitarist. He was a storyteller using distortion and echo as his vocabulary. There's also a deeper connection between the two men. Both were producer-guitarists, musicians who understood how the studio itself could become an instrument. Both favored emotion over accuracy. Both were willing to follow intuition even when it went completely against the rules. And both believed that a perfectly clean performance means nothing if it doesn't carry a piece of the player's soul. When Neil Young calls Jimmy Page one of the greatest of all time, he's not talking about speed, technique, or textbook precision. He's talking about feeling, the ability to make the guitar sound human, flawed, and fiercely alive. Page's greatness came not from perfection, but from embracing imperfection so honestly that it became its own form of mastery. And in a way, Page completes the entire picture of Young's list. Because if J.J. Cale represents subtlety, Hendrix represents freedom, Jansch represents innovation, and Lofgren represents humility, then Page represents the final truth. Greatness isn't about playing the guitar right, it's about playing it real. When you look at Neil Young's list, it's easy to think these 5 guitarists have nothing in common. J.J. Cale played like he was whispering. Hendrix played like he was conjuring the weather. Bert Jansch reinvented the acoustic guitar without ever raising his voice. Nils Lofgren blended into the music so gracefully that people forgot how hard it is to do what he does. And Jimmy Page built entire kingdoms out of distortion, echo, and instinct. Different sounds, different eras, different worlds. But to Neil Young, they are the same in the one way that actually matters. Every one of them used the guitar as an extension of who they were. Not as a tool for showing off, not as a contest, and not as a technical exercise. They chased feeling, not flawlessness. They valued honesty over precision. They understood that the most powerful moments in music often come from the cracks, the imperfections, the parts that can't be rehearsed. And that's the thread that runs through all of Young's work as well. He has spent his entire career choosing instinct over expectation, emotion over polish, and vulnerability over safety. So when he points to these 5 guitarists as the greatest, he's really pointing to the qualities he believes keep music human. In the end, this list isn't just a tribute to his influences. It's a manifesto, a quiet reminder that the soul of music lies in expression, not perfection. Because long after the trends fade and the techniques evolve, one truth always remains. The guitar doesn't remember the cleanest player. It remembers the most honest one. And that, more than anything, is what Neil Young has been trying to tell us all along.